You're with Julian on the Brown Note with an enormous backlog of albums and a review of the latest album by the UK band The Clientele called I'm Not There Anymore, which came out probably 2 months ago? No, actually about 6 weeks ago. I've got so many albums to get through, so unfortunately these two are long form reviews. The first two up. I've got to say, is this t-shirt too much? I've got some new t-shirts and it seemed like a good idea at the time. And then I was putting it on and it's really vivid, and I was thinking, am I going to get asked to actually leave places? It's a bit much, maybe. There's a review of French Connection 2 in the podcasts, I think, going back a few years. So The Clientele were one of these bands that I thought I knew everything about, and Beth Orton's going to come up again at the end, if I remember, where they're always good, and they've got a very referenceable style, which is, in their case, very sort of post-60s psychedelic, acoustic, mainly pop / chamber pop. Very sort of soft and gentle, a little bit post-Nick Drake as well. And they were quite a big thing around 2000. Their debut album and the follow-up, I got both, Suburban Light and The Violet Hour. And they became known for this as this very sort of gentle, lilting, slightly psychedelic, folky pop indie band. And I just stopped paying attention, really. And they've carried on, which was a surprise to me. And they've only released 2 albums in the last 13 years. Music for The Age of Miracles was the last in 2017. And this one, I Am Not There Anymore, is the band pared down to a 3-piece of Alistair MacLean, the writer and singer, and Mark Keane and James Hornsey. Alistair MacLean has a claim to fame, which is that he turned down the original draft of Harry Potter when he was working for a publisher. And this album is got 2 main reference points. One, I think it was written during COVID, I'm not 100% sure, but it was certainly about the death of his mother. Maybe Maria? I hasn't got it in here. One of the songs does indeed reference that name. But the thread of the album is the nostalgia of his youth and childhood, and the memories of his mother, and at times quite darkly, other times wistfully, and not only sort of reverentially about him running around with a hula hoop as a child, but also, sitting in the backs of cars smoking when he was a teenager and stuff like that. It's full of really vivid lyrical vignettes. And the other thing, apart from this thematic cohesive whole around the death of his mother, is the fact that this band, known for very traditional songwriting and instrumentation, got computers, in their own words, I think they said. And this is an album that is far more experimental than I would have given them credit for being able to do. And there's intermissions throughout the album, there's field recordings, there's spoken word segments, which really do bolster this album. You can hear it because it's very long, 19 tracks long, and taps out at just over 63 minutes. You could tell if they compressed it down to the really quite good normal songs that they would do in the sort of psych pop, acoustic psych pop vein, that it would have been, a 40-minute long traditional Clientele album. But is it Clientele or Clientele? I'm going to go with Clientele because they're British. And that would have made a fine album, but it would have been one of their normal albums. And I mentioned like Beth Orton. Beth Orton's album last year completely changed my opinion of her by really pushing the experimental envelope and delivering a whole new act. This is halfway there. This is an album peppered with experimentation, even in the individual tracks, so not enough with some of the flourishes and looped beats and elements in the songs that might not have been there before, which show a wider imagination on the arrangements on the tracks. The opener as well is 8.5 minutes long, which is unusual for a band who mainly stay in a pocket when it comes to songwriting, stylistically and time-wise, sort of 3 minute tracks. It's called Fables of the Silverlink, and I'm assuming that it is about the train line, the Silverlink, and that I've got a fascination for these train lines. I'm from London, and we have the Tube in London, which is the underground subway network, but there's the Overland network, which goes to drearier, more out of the way places you might not really want to go unless you live there. And I always remember Silverlink being one of those lines that passed through kind of more desolate parts of London. Overland as well. It didn't go to Camden. It went to like Camden North. And you just get slightly weirder folk on it as well. And it's got lyrics, Alicia Macanas from Spain. It does the Spanish lyrics on it. So she might be the female voice. It's got a very arresting sort of violin and breakbeat opening, which is surprising. And Dying in Vain as a lyric. It's quite poppy, and it's also got multiple parts to the arrangement, which leads to a review I'm going to do next, another very long review of Love's Forever Changes album, which come up. So basically I watched and reviewed Jacob's Ladder and this album by the Clientele. Both really reminded me of the album Forever Changes by Love, so I'm going to do a review of that. It's a very ambitious track to get underway with, and it sort of sets the scene for the fact that they're on a slightly different tangent with this album. The second track, Radial B, and the fourth track and the 8th and 10th tracks are all called Radial Letter, and they're piano interludes which sort of glue segments of the album together. Garden Eye Mantra is a bit of a sleight of hand, because the first 2 minutes of this 4.5 minute song are just instrumental, and I didn't think there were going to be any lyrics coming out. And it's got a band that we're associated with their style called Broadcast, whose female lead singer, I can't remember the name of, passed away about 7 or 8 years ago. Great band. Look up Come On Let's Go. Terrific track. And it's got that same sort of 60s psych-folk with a bit of trip-hop vibe coming in, and a kind of wandering bass line, which I really liked as well. But the lyrics as well, and the little incidental details in the back of a hatchback, cigarettes glowing. It's got a slightly sort of pictures of Matchstick Men, the Status Quo song Warping of the vocal, which was really, really good. Number 5, Lady Grey. This album sort of is the standard Clientele psych pop song with a little bit of embellishment, usually with something in between of each track. And Lady Grey is another one, perhaps a stronger track than the second one. All the beautiful things are opaque. It's got some lovely lyrics on it. And another really strong pop song, and the live drumming this time instead of that trip-hop breakbeat of Garden Eye Mantra. Dying in May, definitely about his mother, but most of the songs do sort of reference her lyrically in some way. It's got a more insistent live percussion as well, and not for the first time in this album, it made me think very briefly and slightly of Indian music, maybe raga music, and also the fact that the sort of insistent drumming is a very sort of soft version of the Beatles' Tomorrow Never Knows, which is also reminds me of Indian music as well. And it's sort of looping as well. 7 is the first real full-blown spoken word piece, and it's like a lyrical vignette fragment of a short story with music in the background that sort of breaks off at the end. Blue Over Blue, another really strong pop moment, great use of strings and horns. Again, the bread and butter of Love's Forever Changes album, with the strings and the horns in the arrangements. As again, Claire's Not Real, another beautiful pop song. Claire's Not Real, kind of tapping into certain vibes about people not being real, which is a strange thing. The strongest of the spoken word experimental parts on the album is My Childhood, written by, well, it says McLean. My childhood is Mummified Rain. My childhood is a chord played behind another chord that isn't played. It's got some really profound lyrics. I really enjoyed it, and I wish there were more. Other than that, I mean, I can't go through every single track because there's so many. I really like the stems of Anise with this rolling groove and synths that come into it. And the last couple of tracks really hit. I Dreamed of You, Maria, I think is about his mother. I Dreamed of You, Maria, in a Doorway by the Sea. And it focuses... The thing I like about the last couple of tracks is that they focus back on previous tracks on the album, so we get back to the sitting in the back of the hatchback with your cigarette glowing. And the last track, A Spoken Word One, The Village Is Always on Fire, references the My Childhood track as well, with some of the same lyrics that are spoken by a woman who I'm not sure of. But I can click here, can't I? No, it doesn't say either. Oh, here we go. Jessica Griffin, who are you? She does the spoken word of the Would-Be Goods. Noted for her precise received pronunciation accent when singing. Actually kind of like that. I don't know who you are, but if you have precise received pronunciation, I like it. I'm being really critical about this album by mentioning any flaws, because it is one of the best albums I've heard this year. I'll bring up Beth Orton again. The thing that made that album better than this album is she went all in. Here, I think that I look forward to the experimentation more than I do the traditional Clientele songs, because I feel like I've been down that road a lot, and they are a little bit samey if you bunch them all together. So you do feel like they're sort of redoing the same song a bit. Beth Orton's, the entire songs were very different to stuff that I'd heard from her before. The instrumentation and the mood of the tracks, they were all quite long form, often with very sort of almost avant-garde musicality to them. Whereas this one's more sort of, here's our traditional 3.5 minute psych pop song, here's an experimental one, here's our 3.5 minute psych pop song. That's the only complaint I could have, which stops it being an absolute flat out masterpiece. I'll say this, like the Beth Orton album, it has reinvigorated me into wanting to hear the next Clientele album and where they go. I just want them to double down on this level of experimentation. Some of the spoken word ones on it were the best songs on the album for me, or at least the most interesting. The My Childhood one, it really stuck with me. I thought it was fascinating. So overall, it's a great long form listen. It's sumptuous. It did remind me an awful lot of Love's Forever Changes, and a surprisingly great album, given you would always expect them to be a 7 out of 10, and this time an 8.5 out of 10. But nearly more for the Clientele, and I'm not there anymore.